Our Region's Business is sponsored by PNC for the achiever in you. Our Region's Business. Innovation, transformation, momentum, improving our communities and driving technologies that will shape our region for generations. The collaboration that brings vitality, prosperity, and life to living. Stay with us for the coming half hour as we examine in depth our region's business. Now, here's your host, Bill Flanagan.
Today on Our Region's Business, I-376 plugs into an electric car corridor, and urban entrepreneurs get the power to prosper. But first, taking the pulse of small business as the holiday season and a new year approach. PNC is out with its twice-a-year survey of small business persons throughout its business area, and their pulse appears to be weakening. Kurt Rankin is an economist with PNC, a sponsor of Our Region's Business. Welcome back. Good to see you.
Thanks, Bill.
Although, I don't know, you're kind of like a Grinch right now for this time of year. The news is not as good, or at least the perceptions are not as positive as they were when you hear about 6 months ago. No,
the fall survey, PNC's fall survey, did show some backsliding throughout PNC's territory, from the Midwest even down into Florida. Definitely the business sentiment among small and mid-sized business owners is worse than it was in the spring. But it's not quite as bad as it was at the height of recession, which is the good news.
Okay, well, hold on to anything we can at this point. Well, what seems to be the concern? Now, you usually wind up taking this, what, late summer, early fall is when you go out and do this survey?
Yes. The idea that businesses weren't feeling as good about the U.S. macroeconomic environment, some of that comes from the debt ceiling debate and uncertainty about where policy was headed. The Federal Reserve continued with its quantitative easing programs, so the idea that the federal government had to support the economy was weighing on business owners. By and large, though, much of what business owners told us was that they're not willing to charge forth, they're not willing to take risks and expand, but for the most part, they're just holding steady, expecting over the next 6 months for profits, sales, hiring, these sorts of things, just to stay steady. Not deteriorate very much, but not advance at any great pace either.
Wow. Well, risk-averse businesses and employers who don't have a lot of confidence in the future tend also not to be tend not to do a lot of hiring, I would think. That doesn't bode well for the job market.
Right. We've got the unemployment rate. PNC is only projecting the unemployment rate to fall to 8.7% by the end of next year. National unemployment rate. The Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh as well will continue to fall, and they're starting from a lower point around 7%. But that fall is only going to be very slight compared to what we would normally see at this point coming out of a recession.
Which is unusual to have this kind of unemployment this long after officially the recession ended.
Yeah, just we're now 4 years after the start of the recession in the fourth quarter of 2007, and just in the third quarter, U.S. macroeconomic activity got back to the level of where it was prior to the recession. So it's taken us 4 years, 16 quarters, whereas that recovery period is usually only 5 or 6 quarters after the recession hits.
Wow, so really is a real change game. Now, do you find this you mentioned the unemployment rate here is a little lower than it is throughout the footprint and nationally as a whole. But what these sentiments are they the same here as they are everywhere else PNC is operating?
No, actually, one thing the Pittsburgh economy has going for it, specifically with Pittsburgh, is house prices have already recovered on aggregate to where they were prior to the recession. We didn't have a housing bubble to burst in the first place, so house prices have been able to get back to their pre-recession levels. And that feeds into consumer sentiment, because while job growth may not be outstanding, those people with incomes are not worrying about the value of their homes falling. They're more likely to go out and spend the incomes that they have, and small and mid-sized businesses are so dependent on local spending that this is a good sign for Pittsburgh small and mid-sized businesses.
Okay, that means there's a little more of a market for them than might be the case in other parts of the country, and you see that in the attitudes about the future. A little bit more positive, or at least a little more of a neutral attitude here than in other places?
Actually, yes. There's 3 markets that stood out in the survey. Indiana, which was linked so much to the manufacturing comeback, the auto industry, and St. Louis, which has a very diverse manufacturing base, much like Pittsburgh. But Pittsburgh, those 3 market areas, all market areas across the survey are showing expectations to raise prices in the next 6 months. About a third of them are expecting to raise their prices, but those 3 markets feel confident enough that they can raise prices more than 2% feeding from the costs that they're seeing. They feel confident enough that they can pass those costs through to consumers. So prices are rising, but businesses' ability or willingness to pass that on varies by market. In Pittsburgh, or the Pennsylvania markets at least, are one of the top markets willing to pass those costs on because they feel confident that consumer activity is stronger here.
So, and again, we have somewhat lower unemployment, somewhat better prospects where that's concerned, I guess, as we head in the new year. So that's something really to hold on to. Now, this is attitudes, though. I mean, our attitude, you always hear about like the consumer, the confidence surveys and all that kind of stuff. Are attitudes always in lockstep with what people actually do, whether they're individuals or businesses?
Normally we would expect that, but over the past 6 months to a year, consumer action versus consumer sentiment have really diverged. Spending has been consistently positive. It's slow, but we are seeing consumers spend. That was the main driver behind the third quarter national GDP number, was consumer spending. But consumer sentiment continues to tank, and we see all surveys just showing that people are not happy with the current state of the economy, and they're not expecting things to get better at any pace.
Geez, but they're still out there kind of doing business and moving the economy along. Not a great sentiment or set of attitudes you would want, I would think, most elected officials going into a presidential election year next year.
Right. No, anyone who's an incumbent from either party, I imagine, has these sentiment surveys on their mind, and the economy is, of course, going to be one of the top issues for the debates.
So, I mean, I guess what the best we can say right now is, based on these surveys, kind of a very tepid economy going forward, but some big uncertainties out there. A lot of people, are keeping an eye on Europe right now. That's a great unknown.
Yeah, Europe and their fiscal crises from Greece, Ireland, Portugal, even now Spain and Italy, and I even saw a mention of France today. The potential for France's credit markets to freeze up is really the only risk that we're lending at PNC to our forecast, the potential of a double dip. We've not predicted or forecasted a double dip recession, even going back to last year when the talk was in the news. So our baseline is still for slow but steady growth, but Europe's potential collapse in Europe is really the only major risk that could send the U.S. recession, or the U.S. economy, back into recession in our view. All
right. Well, we all need to keep an eye on the news coming out of Europe, that's for sure, and hopefully we'll just grind away and get a little better, a little faster here in our region. Kurt Rankin from PNC, thank you. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Bill.
Next up, a new electric car corridor is on the way all along I-376 right here in our region. Find out how to plug in when our region's business returns. Stay with us.